Good. Hello and welcome everybody. I am Ashish Avasti, the chair of MCAA Communication Working Group, and welcome you all to the Around the World webinar. Today the topic is Art of Collaborative Grant Writing and How to Make It Fun. And we'll be hearing it from our exceptional speaker, Dr. Rajiv Vaid Basaiawmoit. He is the head of SciTech and Innovation at Aarhus University, Denmark. He's also an entrepreneurship educator and an entrepreneur himself, having co-founded two companies, one Biosymphonics and its subsidiary, a gaming company known as EduSymphonics EduGames. So, Rajiv, I'm sure from a long list of credentials, I must have forgotten something. Would you like to tell us a bit more about yourself, in case I forgot something?
Yes, well, thank you first of all for the invite, Ashish. I'm very glad to be here. I've just had a long day of teaching, so I still teach, even though I have a very active travel and speaking schedule. But I love teaching, and that's why I still prioritize teaching. So yeah, so essentially, I'm based at Aarhus University. I don't know how many of you know Aarhus. It's a lovely little city in Denmark, second largest city after Copenhagen. Most people know Copenhagen maybe in Denmark, but Aarhus is the second largest. It's a pretty big university. It's about, I think, 40,000 students or so, and the population is around 350 to 400,000. And so it's a very student lively city, and we get a lot of exchange students from all over the world, a lot from Europe, of course. And I'm based at the dean's office in the natural science faculty and the technical science faculty. So those are the two faculties I am sort of servicing. And when I say I'm in the dean's office, that's mainly because that's an admin unit. So essentially, I don't have to teach because I'm in administration, and my job is to essentially design, embed entrepreneurship programs and improve both conditions and entrepreneurial profiles of junior researchers, master students, PhD students, as well as faculty. And of course, help at least in the creation of startups, which can then go towards our incubator. And that's what, let's say, is my formal task. And then, of course, to assist that, I, of course, do teaching and then I combine a lot of other things. As Ashish was mentioning, I also have, I mean, I teach entrepreneurship, but I'm also an entrepreneur myself. And that's the other hat that I have, which is excellent because I use that as a gamification hat. And that's something that I also incorporate in my teaching very strongly. So that's kind of, let's say what I do. My own background is, I would say, from a I mean, I'm originally from India, have been working and living here in Denmark for the last almost 20 years now. I think I moved to Denmark first in 2004 to do my PhD in biophysics. And then I worked in the field of nanoscience, membrane proteins, what else? I think in the sciences, yeah, biochemistry, those were what I did. And then I moved from there to the business school, where I then did an MBA in sustainability. And then I ended up working as a researcher, as a postdoc at the business school, because apparently they saw some potential and they said you would be an interesting scientist to work in that area. And I approached that with the open mindset that I have. So I worked for a couple of years there before I got called into the humanities faculty at the entrepreneurship center, which was at the humanities faculty, and ended up studying a little bit of both the philosophy of science and entrepreneurship from a social sort of movement, social change agent type of perspective. And then also joined the Center for Entrepreneurship until 2016 before I moved back to the science faculty and have been the head of SciTech Innovation since 2016 until now. So that's kind of my brief background.
Yeah, very brief, I would say. No sarcasm, by the way, if you didn't get that. So let's start the webinar. So my first question, which is obvious. So what exactly do we mean when we say collaborative grant writing, and how is it different than normal grant writing? And also, why did you yourself chose to break the ceiling of grant writing?
Okay, so I think I'm going to sort of put this, maybe I'll just put some slides up because that might be helpful for the people to understand. So I'm going to actually put this up. So I'm actually, so I'll also let you know how I've met Ashish. So we met at the European Science Open Forum meeting earlier this year and at Katowice, or Katowice in Poland. And while I was there, I actually um, we talked about this game and this kind of project that I work with in grant writing. So that's how we started. And just to give you a very quick context, this is not just me. There's also others that have been involved. So it's of course a collaborative project in itself. And but how it started is essentially the Junior Researcher Association at our university, at Aarhus University. They contacted us, or they contacted me, because they knew that I do a lot of workshops and let's say uh, lectures, hackathons, that kind of stuff. So they contacted us and said, you know, Rajiv, you are doing a lot of things for entrepreneurship. Could you do something for us as well? And then I said, yeah, I can run an entrepreneurship workshop for you. And they were like, yeah, I know we are scientists, and while some of us could be interested in entrepreneurship, not all of us are interested in entrepreneurship. Could you do something else for us? So and then I basically sat down and said, okay, so what is it that you care about? What is it that you're interested in? And the Junior Researcher Association, if you think about it, so what's the aim of this association is to actually improve the, let's say, conditions of junior researchers. That's what they try and do. And of course, they also want to sort of learn how to do things better and become better researchers, of course. But the two things I told them to highlight two really important things they cared about. And they told me, well, one was tenure. So they of course wanted tenure, like how to get tenure track, that kind of thing. And the other was research grants. And they said these are the two things I think, how to get research funding. This is kind of the thing that we also care about. And then I told them, well, tenure is a bit more complicated. It's something that I think it would be. I mean, it's a very good problem to have, and a lot of people are working on that. But it's a much longer term problem that I don't think I could solve immediately for you guys. But I think on the research funding space, I think I could do something. So we basically said, let's come back in a meeting 2 months from now, and we'll try and come up of a solution for you. And essentially, that led to the creation of a game and a workshop so that we could actually help them. And that's how this whole thing started. So this whole idea actually started as a need that came from junior researchers. So Ashish,
So
that's kind of hopefully that answers your question, how this came about.
that answered the third question, yes. But what
Yes.
is collaborative writing exactly, and how is it
Yeah.
different to normal grants?
Yes. Um, so when we talk about collaborative writing, right? So when this Junior Research Association contacted me and they said, I also asked them, okay, what is it that you guys normally do at the moment? And they said, well, sometimes we have to write grants, sometimes we have to do this, but we do it in it's essentially not planned, is essentially not something we do. So I said, okay, let's see if we do it in this particular way. Let's see what the challenge is. So I actually found out that when we're talking to them, so of course, in collaborative grant writing, there's a lot of other things that you need that would define success. So first of all, the success is dependent on the ability of the researcher or the research team to, first of all, stitch together a consortium. So a consortium is basically people wanting to work together in the same project. So someone who has the same project as a goal. Now, one thing is forming the consortium. The other thing is for the consortium to stay together, right? So that means it's not just team formation, it's team retention as well. So the team needs to stay together for a long time because the grant process is not just something you meet for one meeting. It's something that'll happen maybe over a few months or sometimes even a year or more. So, and then you need to meet often, you need to delegate tasks. That's another task. Then you need the ability to write convincingly, precisely, and succinctly, and having well-defined goals and realistic ambitions, right? So these are the things that you would need to do, and you need to do it together. It's not just one person. So if you really think about it, that if that's the success criteria for having all of this, you need a lot of these different type of skills. You need project management skills, you need networking skills, you need grant writing skills, and you need the skills to be how do you handle uncertainties, not only in the writing process, but also in the team process. And then you need to be able to take the perspective of the funder, and you also need to be able to understand what is it that the funder is looking and whether we in the consortium actually align to those goals. So that's essentially what you kind of need to be looking for. And another thing, I think, if you really think about collaboration for grant applications, so there is, of course, no doubt that you need to have to start with what I would call a shared value and goal. So it has to be a shared vision, a shared goal that you all align on. And then you need complementary skills, because why do you want to work together if you all are the same? It doesn't make sense. So you need to bring in people who are a bit different than you, people maybe even from a different discipline, which is becoming more the norm. Um, so that you can have these complementary skills that can strengthen what you are doing. That's one thing. But when you come with these complementary skills, you also need to have a very clear role definition. What is it that I bring to the table? What is it that my collaborator brings to the table? And then you need to be able to give commitment, with commitment of both time and availability, because you need to commit and say, yes, we'll meet often, we'll do this together. You need a lot of attention to detail, because you need to understand what the grant call is asking, what is it that you need to do. And then you need to also have a shared understanding of budgeting. I think this is something that I think maybe budgeting is, of course, while it sounds challenging, and you need to understand what you need, right, in the grant, and this can be also a negotiation between different. Usually, if there's some support that's given in a university, it's usually this part of a grant call that you get support for. That's the budgets. That's because the budgets have to go through certain formats, there's certain regulations, there's certain overheads, and all of these things that you need to know. And maybe you may not know that. So we do have grant support offices in most universities that you can reach out to. And usually they'll help you out with your budget template. They will not help you out with the rest of the grant, but they'll definitely help you out with the budget template. But that's, it's just one of the things that that you also need to take care of. And then, of course, you need to be adaptable in solving the problems when they arise. And finally, you of course need to be very clear in your communication about not only in the grant itself, but also in the with the consortium as well. So this, I would say, is kind of the things that you really need for collaborative grant writing.
Thank you. So are these grants generic or country specific? What's the to decode the funding system?
Yeah. So the thing is, I would say that uh, a lot of grants, of course, I mean, everyone comes from different countries, and their own countries have their own, let's say, funding authorities that maybe have different formats, different, let's say, expectations of how the grant should be provided. So, of course, you have to meet the conditions of that local chapter or local template, whatever they provide you, right? Most agencies will even provide you a template that you have to fill out. Now, working within the European Union, you of course have the European Union funding calls. It can either be the Horizon, or it can be the ERC, or many of these, and they also have their templates you can download, you can check it out. But if you were to do that, and I mean, I would just suggest, maybe if you look at, go to 3, 4 different countries, their grant websites, download their grant templates, for example, do the same for the ERC, or something like that, you will notice at least a particular trend. There's something they all ask. And that's what I would call the generic grant sort of content, which is the backbone of a grant. And that backbone will usually have certain things like, what's the research question that you have? What's the problem that you want to solve? What's the solution that you are proposing, or the hypothesis that you have to be able to address that? Who is the team that's going to be behind this? Who are the people who's going to work on this? How do you propose to sort of go about things? And they'll also ask you, what is the expected impact of your proposal? why should this project, I mean, why should we care to even read about this project? There's that. What is the societal impact? What's the larger impact about this project that you're proposing? That's another thing that a lot of grant agencies nowadays ask. And finally, they also look into feasibility. Whatever you're proposing, is it feasible even? Is it doable in the timeline and in the budget that you are proposing? And I would call these, I would say, the generic factors, even though there may be some specific details that every sort of country or every other sort of funding agency may have certain specifics, but this kind of, let's say, main body would still be quite generic. And if you can master these, you can basically apply in many, many areas.
Nice. Well, you mentioned consortium, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what are some of the things we should keep in mind before choosing our collaborators? Is there any strategy to go about it, or is it something different?
Yeah. So, of course, when you are, so I would say, consortium is essentially, it's a formal word we use. Is essentially, I like to use the word team because I think it's a team that you are forming. And in many ways, it's actually very similar to a startup team. Um, when you choose your consortium, I think I would rather let me put this to the audience first, okay? Has anyone here in the audience worked in a consortium? Just wondering.
Well, I think I have.
You have, yeah. So, and if you have worked in consortiums, have you experienced like, or at least have you been in the process of choosing the consortium, or you were just drafted into one? Let me start by you, Ashish. Is it something you just joined, or is it something you were involved in forming?
So, for one, I was involved in forming it as well, but for other one, I was just part of it, like
Yeah,
just
you were
there.
just part of it. Yeah, okay. So, and the thing is, when you're involved in forming, how long did it take you? Just roughly, if you remember.
A couple of months.
A couple of months, right? So, and I mean, so I teach entrepreneurship, and one of the things we actually say is finding your co-founder, a good for co-founder for your business can sometimes be more harder and more important than even finding your partner. So, and when people say this, people laugh and they say, are you serious?" And I'm like, yes, because you really want a co-founder who's different than you, but who aligns with your missions and goal, and at the same time is able to check you, control you, criticize you, and compliment you when needed, right? So it's a lot of these things. Um, so looking for this sort of partners, and now it's not just a partner, you need to have multiple partners. So that's kind of the one. I do have someone responding in the chat that yes, I asked for a partner to 15 Australian universities, 3 answered to me. I applied to a grant with one of them, right? So that's another thing that you will see. So it's you might have heard of this term called coalition of the willing. And basically, what we mean is sometimes you basically form a team with not who you want, but who you can get. And that's a very different sort of scenario because, especially in grant writing, especially in some European grants, for example, whether it be the Erasmus calls or some of these others, they actually tell you you need to have 2 or 3 partner countries involved. You need to have people from different domains than yours. And usually, when you're reaching out, it's very hard to actually get people to accept. So in sometimes when you don't have the luxury of choice, you of course accept whoever you can get, right? So that's just the reality of it. Keeping that reality in mind, okay, if that happens, then you just say, okay, this is who we got. How can we improve this relationship, right? That's one thing that you should do. If you do have the luxury of choice, then I would sometimes go for, make sure that you are finding the partner who really is complementary, but also who is accessible. Someone who's ready to give time, someone who's ready to respond to your things, and you can usually know this in terms of how they respond to your emails, how's the conversation that you go with them. Are they really aloof? Do they just want to be part of it just because you called them and they couldn't be bothered? Usually it's not a great sign to have them in a partnership. You basically want to get someone who is maybe as enthused by your proposal, maybe even energized, and gives you really novel output. And that's the kind of people I think if you can get, those are the type of people you have to try and get. So searching for people is a good task in itself, and I think spending some time on it, using your networks, approaching people is something I strongly, strongly recommend.
Thank you. But as you mentioned, we have to be realistic and accept whosoever comes.
Yes.
And it's not always ideal. You don't always get the best person for the job, and you
Yes.
get stuck with some, let's say, what type of person? I would say some different type of person,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
you don't always see eye to eye with. So how to
Mm.
deal with those situations? You have some tips how to make those sort of collaborations more enjoyable, especially when
Okay.
you're facing deadlines and there's such high stakes.
Yes. And I think um, I will. I just stopped the share because I just need to go back to another slide and just highlight if that's something I had. Um, I think it's a great question because I think this is what we are all sort of working on. Um, so I mean, I would say that when you've gotten whoever you've gotten, you kind of have to um, build an effective team, right? So basically, when you are choosing, there is whatever you can do, and then you influence that, and then you choose, like we said, sometimes who you get. You work with the practicality, but after you have done that, you need to make this kind of alignment. So remember, I told you that you need to stitch together a consortium. That's really the first task. We have overcome that task. We have found the people we could find on the practicality of things, but now you need to ensure that the consortium stays together. And I think the first task, and really this is the first task, is, I would say, ask everyone to make a small vision statement. What is it that they think they want to do in this particular grant call or in this grant sort of project together? What is it that they care about? Now, and I asked this usually in writing in a lot of the projects I've been involved in, and mainly because when you have a call, either a Zoom call or a physical meeting, a lot of time it sounds like we are all in agreement when we are talking, and this is usually what happens. But it's only when you ask people to write down and say, okay, can you write a one-line statement of the statement that you would sort of agree on? You might find that it's actually very different to what was being said in the room, and therefore getting this in writing is really very key. It's the same when you hear about the climate summits like the COP meetings or um, uh, and what happens is when they have to make an agreement, it usually takes a lot of time because they have to get these written statements, and the discussions that actually happen a lot before are actually working towards that kind of written statement. So getting this kind of vision is usually very, very, very good to have. Another thing you could also do is work on a rough sort of contract, and this is not a contract as in a legal contract, but what I call an informal contract of that I agree to commit to this consortium in providing this and this resources, myself, my time, and and we will work in these particular ways and stuff like that. And if you do this, it also allows you to sort of say to people, this is really something that we want to do together. So it's sometimes very useful to have these are informal contracts. Now, remember, you can't really use these contracts for anything except the fact that when people write it and they put it out there, they feel committed. They feel that we are actually in this together. So it's about trying to grow a cohesion with people that you are meeting sometimes maybe for the first time. Um, and then I would say continuous or constant sort of meetings. Now, not just meetings for the sake of meetings, but actually whenever you have some important updates, when you have someone who's really having some interesting thing to share, then you have these short meetings where people can just share what they have done, and you keep everyone on board. Those that could not join, make sure that you have the meeting notes. What is it that we discussed in this meeting? And then you send it out as a summary later on that this is what was discussed, so that people who could not join they also feel on board. And then you can make sure that next time when we meet, so also have a clear next action step, what's going to happen after, in a rough timeline from 2 months from now or 3 months from now, we expect this and this to happen, and even highlight, and I would like this particular consortium member to provide or give a summary of their area of interest, etc. So that would be a way to do these things.
Great.
Mhm.
And audience, like if you have some specific questions for our speaker, feel free to write it down in the chat and we'll get them to,
Mhm.
right? So I
Yep.
heard you're into board games, right? What got you into them? So that's so much so that you created a board game on grant writing. Talk us
Yeah,
through that.
so I think I'll get back to these. So when you sort of see this kind of thing, so there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen in a grant. The other thing that I also then kind of sort of think, well, you know, can we actually make it fun as well? So if I really think about it, well, how can we get people to have a shared vision? That was the question we asked. Could we use some fun like gamification or something that we could have? Could we make this process transparent? These were the kind of questions we were having. Could we provide collaborative tools that could really allow people to collaborate more easy? And could we empower sort of decision making? And then could we celebrate small wins, right? So this is kind of with this kind of format in mind, we decided, okay, let's bring together these kind of goals and package it together in a session which would kind of enhance all of these things. And we did that through a board game, and that's mainly because I've been working with board games for over 10 years now, and I find them to be a great tool, mainly because it's it's something that you can have a good conversation in. That's one. It's tactile. You still meet people face to face, and you kind of have to do a lot of things together. So I really find board games really quite fun, and not just from the entertainment value of it, but also in trying to get to understand another person better. And because of that, we actually went ahead with creating the board game. Now, this board game just didn't come from scratch. This is something that had some background and some context. And this context that I can give you is, since I work in entrepreneurship, and I had created a board game for entrepreneurship some years ago. And this was essentially in 2016 when we first launched it, and in 2018 it was already in the market. And it's essentially to train, how you can learn design thinking and how you can learn entrepreneurial sort of uncertainty and basically come up with sort of an idea for a startup and how you would work with the team. So there was some overlap that I thought there was in this game already with the process of grant writing. So and because we understood entrepreneurship as a problem solving endeavor, I also see research grants as a problem solving endeavor as well. So we basically went ahead and created this game called Granted, the research grant game. And when we did this, we basically took the basic elements and mechanics of the original game, but applied it into this new context of interdisciplinary research grants. And we did this so that the focus. Remember, it was the Junior Research Association who reached out to us, and the focus here was that they were all from different disciplines, and we realized that when you put people from different disciplines together, sometimes they don't really know where to start, and the game really gives you this kind of um, it gets you seated very fast, gets you discussing very fast, and you start talking about the things that you do. And the focus is you're not just playing. Even though you're playing, there's an ice-breaking element. You are learning some new things. But what you're actually doing is you are actually developing a skeletal proposal. And at the end of the game, you will have a proposal that's kind of with the basic elements that I told you earlier that are very important. What's your research question? What's the proposed hypothesis that you have or solution? How are you going to go apply it? What's the impact? All of those things is then layered in this game that you would actually develop. And by the end of the game, so in 3 hour times, in a 3 hour timeline, I think you would end up developing a, a skeletal concept, a skeletal grant proposal that you can pack up the game and keep it aside. And after that, you can basically keep going back to your grant and writing it, and adding more meat to it essentially, and making it a solid and hefty proposal. And with the collaborators that you now have had a better insight in. So that was at least what the focus was. Um, and the other thing that when we came into granted and we started with the granted, we also looked at, okay, what is the why focus on interdisciplinary grants? And this was mainly because this is really the next trend. I mean, it's most grant calls that you now look today, they actually say, can you get more disciplines involved? Can you get someone that works from a slightly different area than yours? And usually, if you do this, you increase your chances of getting the funding that's already there just by having that. But you also need to figure out how these two different or three or four different disciplines will combine to look at different angles of the problem. And also what we are seeing nowadays is they want you to have more impact focused sort of proposals. That means they want you to look at large challenge areas like climate change, global health, a lot of these things. Somehow your project has to make sense in the larger sense of things, because we are starting to see that this is a much more, I mean, that research cannot just be an isolated endeavor. It has to have some application, some level of connection with society and the societal challenges that we face today, that have become quite really, I would say, much more challenging than maybe some years back. And if I just go back to the one of climate change, we are seeing this all around us with the recent flooding events, or the other type of disasters, natural disasters around us. And really, I think it is a wake up call for many, and I think governments are also realizing this. They're reacting to this, and they're asking everyone, every actor in society, to also take on this. And it's going to play a huge role in future grants, I think, when I really look at it. So, of course, there's going to be high risk, high reward calls, which means that they're going to be also highly uncertain, which is why understanding this uncertainty and working with this uncertainty becomes sort of critical. And I think this is what this our game sort of focused on. And what we did in the game was essentially we focused on making it that you come together in teams where you will have a minimum team size of 3 people, maximum of four, and inside the team you will collaborate, because you have to collaborate. You're learning how to collaborate, but to simulate that, in essence, every team, because is still competing for the funding, we wanted to simulate that you're also sort of competing with other teams. So we did have a sort of an element of competition in there, where you could sort of say that you're competing with the other people that are writing, if you're doing this in a, let's say, workshop setting. But even if not, if you're doing it as a solo setting, or just in your, I mean by solo I mean in your own group, in your own small research group, or something like that, you are still going to be competing with other grant applicants, right? Other people who are actually writing. And so what we have done in the game is, because at the end of the game, you remember you have this proposal, we actually ask you to do a little assessment, a self-assessment of the application you have just written, and we give you a small criteria sheet, where you then map, in the last 2.5 hours, 3 hours that we have developed this proposal, how would you map it with these criteria that we have, fit to call and things like that. And we ask you to self-evaluate using this, and give yourself a score. And this kind of tries to put you in the shoes of the funder, because that's what the funder is going to do. So there's this kind of role play and reverse role play that we have added as elements of the game. And yeah, I think I'll just stop here for now in case there's other questions. Then you're muted, Ashish.
So yeah, so since you mentioned it's a game, I'm sure
Yeah.
there are sore losers in the team, right? So
Yeah.
how that is like they are difficult collaborators. So how do we strategically manage them, avoid conflicts and disagreements while keeping the whole atmosphere sort of positive?
Yes. So we want to keep the atmosphere positive. This is important, and we want you to kind of learn how to do this. So the way we have done this is, um, we want you to handle personalities. And as you can see on the slide here, you have this thing called, you set up the board. So we've made it very easy for you to get into the game. So this is really very, very simple. And I think you can understand and start the game in less than 5 minutes. So that's one that was very important for us to make it like that. So once you do that, and you go through a guided process that tells you, now you pick up this card and now you do this and do that. At a certain point, very early in the game, you will be asked to pick up some characters. These are the characters you will be role playing. Now, these are fictive characters. These are not real characters. These are fictive characters who have certain strengths. And you, as a team, will actually have a choice to choose who you want to role play. And the reason we added this element was, when you play a game, you want to play as, of course, someone that is serious. But usually what happens is that people do not sometimes, reveal themselves very easily. They're very guarded. I don't know this person. I don't really know how to work with this person. So they tend to guard themselves quite strongly. By adding a game element, but asking you to role play someone else, we are kind of asking you to drop that guard. We're asking you to say, with just a fun session, you are role playing someone else. Let's just play this game in this light sort of manner. But there's a little trick involved in still ensuring reality, because if we only did this, then what would happen is you could just go on a fictive tangent and completely just do fictional, unrealistic stuff. And we didn't want that to happen, because remember, this is supposed to be serious and supposed to be, leading into a real result at the end of the game. So we added two other elements. We added the element of, first, you have to have a real grant call with a real deadline before you start the game. And you give the grant call out to people so that they have the grant call in front of them. That's one. Second, when they choose these characters, the characters they're going to be role playing, what they will do is any character that they take, the character will have a particular name, a fictive name, and some skills that the character has. For example, it could be leadership, it could be you are encyclopedic, or you are very good at researching, or you're very good at management, whatever. You have all of the all have different skills, decision making, pattern recognition. These are all the types of skills that we've given you as skills that you can role play. But we put another small rule change, and the rule changes here is, if your background is a chemist, the character you role play will be a chemist. If your background is a biologist, the character will become a biologist. So we actually ask you to add your real world domain expertise, your real world domain discipline, to the fictive character you will role play. And this, coupled with the real grant call you're working with, this really brings in reality and seriousness into the game, while still allowing you to role play in a slightly fictive scenario, and having these tough characters that you might have in a consortium to also behave in the manner in which the rules of the game is actually asking you to do so. And then you will basically define your area of interest, which is again essentially defined by the grant call, and you'll basically work together to define your problem, come up with solutions, and then you will assess your idea in towards the end. And usually you would do this by, we have this is the standard process where you have some questions. Every question will trigger, well, three options, and the idea is these three options, each of these options has some learning in there. And as a team, just for the game session, you will choose one option. But to really improve your skills in grant writing, you should essentially look at all three options and look at all three consequences, so that you learn what is it that we can do. And because the learning, that's where the learning is in learning the consequences or the effects of the options that you take. And then there's some dice that the game gives you that adds the fun element, but also simulates uncertainty. And you have to give meaning to these dice, because they will move you on the game in different ways. And you need to convert the dice roll into a realistic narrative of what went right or what went wrong, to both increase or decreasing your uncertainty. So, and then of course you kind of repeat this process 5 times until you kind of start with your question and end with impact and end with feasibility of your proposal.
Great. You mentioned uncertainties. So, what sort of uncertainties are we talking about in the game and also in real life grant writing? Like, what are certain uncertainties which one is
Yes.
bound to find, and how do we overcome them?
Yeah. So the thing about uncertainty is that uncertainty is actually a very sort of complex topic in itself. And of course, it's something that I think a lot of people are maybe not used to. Also because we think about, when we think about uncertainty, the real definition of uncertainty is things you cannot plan for, things you cannot foresee. That's the real definition of uncertainty, right? So, and the main thing you can do is you need to learn how to react to it. You need to learn what to do with it. And in grant consortiums and in grant calls, you will have team members who may not agree to do what they promised, may go in different directions. Maybe you started with one particular problem and you're ending in another direction which you didn't anticipate. And this will especially happen when you have multiple disciplines, because they're different, let's say, incentives that people are working towards and say, oh, I'm actually more interested in my particular specific area, and that should be more heavy. And of course, while these are, let's say, areas of negotiation, we still want you to kind of come together in this area. So the way to do that is, or at least the way we have simulated this in this is, we have given you uncertainty through multiple layers. The first uncertainty that you get is instruction uncertainty in the game. And by that, we mean of course, it's a simple game to set up and play, but there is no rule book. I mean, the rules are there, because you can't have a game without rules, but the rules come later. So it's sort of, layered. So because we wanted you to just jump into and see what happens. And that already gets people saying, oh, what are we doing here? What's our aim here? And so gets people talking in that direction. And then you slowly understand there's uncertainty of who you have in your team, because we have designed the game in such a way that you have to choose a team depending on who you role play. If you're 3 people, you will choose 3 fictive characters. If you're 5, you'll choose 5. And then as you go, these effect cards that we have, these, as you can see from the effect deck, this will always ask you if you have this particular person in the team, he or she helps you in a particular way. So just give me a second. And when this person will ask, what is it that I can bring to the table? You will look around and see, does this person have? Now, remember, we told you that you have to be realistic about who you can have, because maybe you can never form the perfect team. And that's also something we wanted to teach you. It's an uncertainty in itself, forming the perfect team, because it kind of is difficult to form the perfect team, because sometimes you cannot get the person you want, or people would say, yes, I would like to work with you, but I don't have the time, maybe next year. All this kind of stuff can happen. So we try to teach you to work with the team that you have. And in this case, the game is designed that no matter who you have in your team, you will always lack one character that you need. And then you need to react to that situation. It would have been great if we had this person, but we don't. What can we now do? And this is the things that we simulate. Then there's random events that happen, and random events can be both positive or negative. Like you can have the head of the department drop by and say, "Oh, this was a very interesting. Can you provide a proof of concept to me?" Or you can have a random event where a team member we force this, where a team member has to quit. Right, so it's maybe you are having a great time, but something else has happened, or another consortium come and offers him something better or her better, and this person decides to leave. We simulate that as well. So there's a lot of different uncertainty that we have thrown in the game, and we want you to learn these uncertainties.
Great. But how do one encourage creativity, keeping in mind that you have to align to the proposal's objective? How does one ensure that? This
So
could be in
now,
the game or in real
exactly.
life.
So now, so what we are doing is, of course, we are asking you to focus on uncertainty, to think about what is it that you can do, and what are the things that you're going to encounter. So what we have done is we have first of all taken, like I said, the major elements of the grant call, and we use that as a framework, right? So there's the research question, there's the impact section, there's the feasibility section, um, and in each of those sections, which are essentially mirrored in the question deck, each of these questions are part of the sections of the grant. Um, Now, as you go through the option cards, the option deck, when you select one of the 3 options, at the end of that statement, before you even take the effect, we ask you to now do that particular action. When we ask you to do that action, that's where we ask you to bring in creativity, in the sense that you now have to define the problem, you have to come up with a solution, and we even give you brainstorming tricks and problem storming tricks that are all sort of embedded in there. And these are really to encourage creativity, because um, the whole point of writing a grant is to come up with solutions or come up with interesting hypotheses that are going to try and solve problems that you care about, which means it requires creativity. And the other thing that we have done is, in the game, we have tried to avoid this thing that can happen in teams, which is one dominant player or one dominant person. So we have broken this down, and we say there is something called as the rotating leadership function in the game, which means every person will have to role play or take on the leader role, and the leader role moves from team person to team person. Similarly, which there is a speaking role, so everyone has to speak. The cards have very specific, and I know I'm going to a lot of details now of the game, and I promise I won't go into too much because I can end up speaking a lot about it. So, but the idea is that you have some cards which you read and some cards which you have to summarize for others. And this is also a broken down task. And when we do it this way, one, we are encouraging everyone to be involved and everyone to summarize, but we're also encouraging mistakes to happen because we actually want some mistakes to happen because it's only when mistakes happen, when things don't work the way you want them, that's when you realize how good a team member is. How do we react to uncertainties? How do we react to miscommunications? So we've kind of triggered and designed these very subtly in the game so that you can experience the team as a team should be. So creativity is there because by the end you will end up getting a proposal, but at the same time, and we ask you to fit to call that you should make sure that that is also happening. But at the same time, you'll also learn the strengths and weaknesses mm, of your team who might be role playing, but essentially they're role playing themselves.
Great. So do we have any questions from the audience? Let's see. There is
Uh,
one question. Where can we find the game?
ah, so right now, well, I just put in my website here, biosymphonics.com. So we are still in the process of so this game was kind of released last year. So but right now you just have to write to the email that's in there, and then basically you can send you send an email, then you get a reply back when we send you a quote and stuff. But at the moment our website is being developed where I think a web shop will be coming up, and so in the near future we hope that you could make direct purchases on the website. But for now, you just have to write to us, and then we basically send you an invoice, and you can click and pay on the invoice. That's just one way to do it. Um, if you're a PhD student or postdoc, please make sure that you mention that because we do give a substantial discount for PhD students and postdocs.
Good news for PhD students.
Mhm.
Yeah, and Maria asks, where can we find capacity building funds, grant calls, if you know about them?
Well, to be honest, this is not something that I work on specifically myself, so I wouldn't know this. But I think if you go to I mean, generally, just going to the EU portals for grant calls, you can find a lot. And I think the EU portals are getting better and better designed, so you can actually filter and screen much better for the type of calls that you're looking for. So I'm sorry if I can't help more than that.
No worries. If you have any questions, feel free to write. I do have one question. What would one advice be like for someone, for to push someone to overcome their writer's block or creator's block, as you say?
Yeah.
Is there
So
any one?
I will come to that question and then others can formulate their question. So I want to, of course, just highlight some feedback because it'll indirectly answer this question. So this is feedback that I've had from some researchers, and these are, by the way, interesting feedback. These are from humanities researchers that we played. Um, now, someone said, well, it was fun, it was engaging, but I'm not totally sure on the end result. Maybe because I was only considering writing an application for the next round of seed money. Did this person have a writer's block? I would think maybe he did, or she did, because they weren't really sure, because they weren't really considering for for the grant call that we were playing with, but for the next one. So they were like they were stuck. But at the same time, later on, they found out that it was something that we could do because some people actually found it useful, or they figured out, how you can actually break down questions and decisions. So I think, in general, if you have writer's block, which can happen to anyone, one way to sort of do this, and I mean, you could try using a game, of course, because a game definitely helps. So remember, what the game is doing is it's actually giving you a structured process of going through a grant writing process, right? And then it's also breaking down the task so that you don't have to do it yourself. It's done together with people. I mean, you could play this game solo if you wanted to, and learn all the different things, but I think it's definitely more fun to have more people around. And if I really highlight this particular sort of person who basically said, I don't know, I came in with a very loose idea and I left with a concrete idea that's heavily inspired by my group members, and we are going to submit for a seed grant. Now, what this person is basically saying is you may have some rough ideas in your head, and this is sometimes also the case when you're having writer's block and you don't really know. The best way to kind of solve it is write down these little bullet points or cards, and don't try and write at that time. It's just make some points for yourself, and like don't try and write a full proposal when you're having writer's block, but write some points and brainstorm. And then I would also say walk around a little and talk to people, because you might be surprised the input you would get that can unlock the block that you were having, and you can really be surprised. And like I said, you don't need the game sometimes to do that. You can do this just with post-its and notes, and that's enough, because you just need an inspiration coming from somewhere. But the inspiration will not come if you just keep staring on the screen. So you need to just write down a few points that you think are important, get out there, talk to people that you know, or your network, and just say, can I get your take on this particular point? When you ask someone if you just give someone a post-it and just say, what do you think about this? And randomly, without any context even, it's actually very good, because you will get sometimes a very interesting input or something that might help overcome these blocks that you might have. And I really recommend to try it out if you haven't done it.
That's a great advice. I will definitely try that. It's a pity that nobody teaches the skill of grant writing to young researchers or young people.
Hmm.
So, what do you think? Is this game also, or just collaborative grant writing, is a skill which would be important not just for young researchers, but also for postdocs, senior researchers, or companies? Because
Yes.
EIT Pathfinder requires small startups.
Yes. So now I myself have only, I'm in a research institution, while I'm also in a startup, or a small company. But when I went to, I mean, most people who have contacted me have been researchers. So right now, these are actually researchers from different levels. Um, so I think technically this game could be used by anyone who wants to write a grant proposal, right? And I think it can also be especially useful for people. And when I say people who have never written a grant together, I don't mean people who are too junior or people who have never had the need to write a grant proposal, because there could be, for example, companies, even if they worked in a particular domain for years, they may have not written a grant proposal, but now because of a certain project call, they might have to. And getting them together with a game can actually sometimes be useful to break down the barriers of what are we doing, how are we going to go about it. So that I'm sure can happen. We have also seen one of the greatest things that I think happened with this game was when we mixed junior researchers and senior researchers together. What happens usually is when you have senior researchers, and this is again my own experience, which is why I was very glad to get into this project, because when I was doing my PhD, I had a great boss, I mean, a great supervisor who was very good at mentoring, but whenever it came to grant proposals, he would always say, you know, give me the bullet points, give me your ideas of what you're doing, and I'll formulate it into the form of a proposal. So the idea being, because he was good at it, and he was good at it, he could really get the funding. And of course, it would save him a lot of time if he did it himself instead of asking a junior person to do it. But that's where we get left out in terms of when it comes to training, because when will we learn if we never try it ourselves? So that's kind of sort of sometimes the challenge, that you are not able to learn because you're not given the exposure to do so. And also the risk is high, which is why they don't, I mean, in all fairness to the researchers, it's a high risk game, right? So they're worried that, well, if I give it to someone who has never done this, he may not know how to do this, and and it's a so why not try this out? So I think it's a balance, but I really do think that maybe using simulations or tools like this can really give people or improve their skills, upskill them to the level where you can make everyone comfortable. And we also had that the senior and junior researchers, when they came together in the game, what we noticed is, because the game creates a level playing field, they were able to have a very open discussion. And I think my best sort of example that I would end with is I had this one director of the institute, director of the Interacting Mind Center at that time. He introduced the game, brought the game to his institute. They wanted to use it. They played it. He told me, Rajiv, we're just going to play for the junior researchers because it's currently part of the postdoc training program there at our university. And when he introduced me, he told me I don't have time for the game. I'm a very busy guy, and he's a pretty busy guy. So he said, so I told him that's okay. You can, if you're too busy, it's okay. But before you leave, maybe just sit down 15, 20 minutes. You might have 30 minutes. He said, yeah, I have 30 minutes in hand. I'll just sit down, play a little bit, and then I'll leave. I said, okay. He sat down, he played for 30 minutes, and after 30 minutes, I asked him, you're welcome to leave if you have to. He was like, no, it's fine, and he ended up playing the entire 3 hours.
Wow, great. I think we have reached to the end of this webinar. If nobody has any more questions, I would like to, well, I would wait for 20 seconds because it's a rule. If you wait 20 seconds, someone will ask a question. So let's wait 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So if no one have any more questions, I would like to thank Dr. Rajiv for taking
And
his time, his busy schedule.
I'm
And thank you
also
all for
sharing
being here.
my email. If people want,
Yeah,
they can reach out to me at my university email. Thank you. So,
yeah, perfect. I
okay.
will stop the recording now.